All right, welcome back. We are Game 2014. That's Mobile Game Dev 1 at George Brown College in the fall 2021 semester, and it's week 11, part 1 of our broadcast. And hopefully you guys can all hear me now. Well, today we're going to talk about a couple things. One of them is last time we discussed the start of enemy AI. We kind of placed AI in our game. This time we're going to actually make line of sight work. We've also got a couple of additional things we're going to do today. One of them is we're going to establish, we're going to do some gameplay improvements like it says. We're going to add simple AI sensing with line of sight. I'm not sure if simple would be the right term. I'm going to I've created a custom class for this. And the other thing that we want to do with our demo is do a couple things. Kind of convert our camera, to a pixel perfect camera. So that's something we can do. And we also not just want to do that, but we also want to add in some on-screen controls. So add on-screen controls so we can test it, with like jumping and everything else with touch controls, because we're moving into that second part, which is your mobile piece. Things that are due, Lab 8 is due this Friday. Assignment 2 Part 1, which has been released, is also due this week. I'm not sure if it's this Friday. I think it's due this Sunday, if I'm not wrong. Am I wrong? I think assignments for this one are due Sunday. Yeah, so this should actually say this Sunday, right? So that's something that should happen. Lab 8 is due Friday. Test 2 is due next week. Test 2 is a theory test on platforming, what that is. It'll cover the things that we've talked about in class and those kind of things. So that's where we're at with this. So let's get to it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start a brand new project. I've already done the one for the previous class. I'm going to start with the stuff from last week, right? So let's get to that part first. So again, just like normal, what we do is I'm going to take a brand new folder. That's what I'm going to work out, how I'm going to do it. You can do it different ways. You can download from GitHub, or start with a project, copy the project you had from last week, because you guys had the project we worked on together. I'm going to call this Lab 8, and I'm going to grab everything from Lab 7, except for the library, copy it and move it in there into Lab 8. And then we'll set up a new repository and all that stuff very soon. Otherwise, things to talk about while we're waiting for this to happen is we had a meeting with our dean, just to let you know, and we've been talking about kind of appearing in person in the winter 2022 semester. The plan is that we'll be in a hybrid state in winter of 2022. And what that means is that there'll be one day where we'll be actually physically in class, and there'll be another day for us, half the time, that will be remote. Okay, that's how it'll be for you too. So the lecture pieces, you'll have to appear for the first time. Any kind of tests that happen, in 2022 will be in person for the most part. Presentations might also be in person, right? And then what's going to happen is for any labs, they'll be in person, but for all the lectures after week 1, they're all going to be online, chances are, or as long as the professor agrees to that. All right, so that's kind of the news. Let's open this with our Visual Studio Code. I'm just going to change the README file so that it says Lab 8 before we put this up on GitHub, not 78, but Lab 8. That'd be awesome if we had 78 labs. There we go. Awesome. Okay, great. And now that we have this, I'm going to use GitKraken, and we're going to add in, we'll open up a repo that already exists. So we're going to look at our desktop, GBC, Game 2014, and Lab 8, and select that folder. And what we want to do is take away the remote that this is looking at. one day when GitKraken agrees to do that. So here's our origin, right? We want to remove the origin remote, and we want to stage all the changes that we've made. We're going to make more changes, and we're going to say updated project, commit to changes, and push it the way it is up to GitHub. Push. And we're going to select George Brown, and then it's going to be GAME2014 F2021 Lab 8. This is all correct. Commit and push. And now we should be good. Let's see if that's true. So we're going to go up online and check that out. You're going to see that there is Lab 8. Here it is. Excelente. And what we want to do here is, let's grab this and put it inside of our content so you can always look at this later on. Okay. There it is. All right, so we can always look at that later on. That's the one we're going to be using for today. All right, great. Let's launch Unity now. And I'm going to launch Unity. No, click open. And oops, not remote project. How about open and choose a project. And it's going to regenerate the library. It's going to take a second. So any questions around any of that stuff, the stuff that I'm talking about for next semester? Have you guys heard the same thing for winter of 2022 since we're waiting for this thing to start? Anybody? I know some people are fearful coming back to class when we're physically in person. That's always a challenge. And because we're going to a new normal, and some people will be a little concerned about social distancing and all kinds of stuff. Things that we need to know are you need to be vaccinated before you come to school. That's something that they're going to talk about. And of course, not just be fully vaccinated, but have your PPE with you. So that means you have to wear a mask while we're in class. And it's recommended that you wear an eye shield, especially if you're working closely with others. And, so that can give you further protection in those cases. At the same time, do you have to wear gloves or anything like that? Probably not. But make sure that you are cognizant about what you're doing. You shouldn't let other people handle your equipment and all that kind of stuff, like your laptop. Keep it clean. And I know that they're going to. Contact isn't a thing. People have said that you can't get COVID from surfaces. There's been mixed communication around that, and I'm not a doctor, but they said stuff like that. So there's things that we need to still work out. Things like, for example, what about if a student in your class decides not to wear his mask or their mask? What do you do, right? Do you force them out? Do you call security? What do you do? Those are all things that we have to consider. We have to talk about, right? What about eating? There's going to be a designated eating area and so on. So these are all things that are going to be worked out. It might feel weird in the beginning. So I know when Luigi, our dean, was talking, he said that. He says, a lot of times when we're doing something new like this, it feels weird, but then it becomes a little easier later. All right, I know that's kind of off topic, but I want to talk about it as this thing was loaded. Any questions around that? So that's what the plan is looking like for winter of 2022 at a very high level. You'll get more information in the weeks to come, right directly from George Brown, as they'll be kind of producing the plan and sharing the plan in detail with you guys. Okay, so nothing to worry about right now. Yeah, that's the thing. Sharing lab computers might be okay, but again, you should consider bringing your own laptop if possible. And I think they're going to think, kind of consider those things. Eventually, I think further down the road, I think they're going to get rid of lab computers altogether. Okay, so we're sitting here last time. What we did last time when we started off this thing all together was we had a very simple game. I'm just using a landscape version of the game where I can kind of use, keyboard controls here, and I have a simple, you know, uh, enemy, and they can kind of, find me and push me off. There's no death at this point or anything like that. We want to establish a couple things. One thing we notice is that sometimes when we're playing a game that we get some screen tearing, and especially when it comes to things like colliders, we get like these little separators. See that little separator that pops up there? That is because we're getting some issues with our Cinemachine camera. So I want to fix that problem first. Let's make a pixel perfect camera. That's the first thing I want to do. So first of all, let's make it more apparent. So I want to go into my world and I want to add in another layer. So TD object, let's look at a tile map. We're going to go for rectangular tile map, which we'll call the background layer. Here's my background layer. And my background layer is, I'm going to paint some background tiles on there. And I'm going to do that by selecting the open tile palette. And I've given you several tile maps. I'm going to select, as an example, Sunnyland. And then select the background, or maybe I'll choose Sunnyland Woods, or is it Forest? Forest. And I'll select these two tiles here on the right. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of paste them in, or you can paste them quite large. When I say paste, it's almost like I want to use the paint bucket control to do that. So lots and lots of background tiles. Again, a little bit overkill, but just in case, we don't want our camera coming out of bounds. Yay. Awesome. Okay, great that we've done that to the background. The background has a problem, and the background layer is 0, but our platform, our moving platform, is also at 0, so we can't really see it right now. And so the right thing to do is go into the prefabs folder and into the moving platform, double click. We can go and look at all the tiles and select them in order. The order and layer should be 1, right? So same order and layer that we have everything else. And let's also go back out to make sure that that is carried forward into the other prefab, which is the platform prefab. So if I double click on platform prefab, again, these are 0, and these ones should be 1. So all platforms now, from now on, are going to be on another layer than the back layer. Okay, so that's kind of something. There we go. So background layers are all there, and now we can see the platform, right? And if I add an enemy, let's make another enemy add to the platform. So for now, if I go back to prefabs, grab an enemy and drag them in there, they should be able to go onto the platform. And we're going to see some definite issues when this is happening. All right, so let's take a look. So when I'm playing now and I'm moving around, sometimes we'll get this shimmering happening. See this shimmering here? Sometimes you'll get screen tearing like that. So that there's like kind of an effect. You might see it as well. And especially when you see the opossum, when they move up and down, kind of what that does. All right, so that's what we want to avoid. So in order for us to avoid that thing, we need to do two things. One, we have to add in another component to the main camera. So clicking on the main camera, we're going to go just below the Cinemachine brain. We're going to add another component called Pixel Perfect Camera. This gives us two things: a assets pixels per unit. Let's change this to 16. And a reference resolution, which should be the size of our screen. Again, that would be 3040 by 1440. So kind of a band of resolution to kind of simulate our phone. 16 should work, but you notice now in our game, if I play the game, if I just did that, then our reference resolution actually changed the size of our game, so it's really small. Right? Not finished yet. It's conflicting, and it's conflicting with our virtual camera. Our virtual camera, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the virtual camera, there is an extension, and you want to see where it says add extension. You want to add in something called the Cinemachine Pixel Perfect. Add that in. And that extension alone, once you add that in, what it'll do is it'll control the lens ortho size, right, of your main camera. So right now, my main camera, it says assets pixels per unit 16. If I look at my main camera, it's 10, but if I run it, right, it'll change the size of my orthographic view to match that size. Take a look at that. That's like 11.25. So it's not exactly what we had before, right? We can change this by going to something like 8, right? Which makes it closer to 10, or is 10 actually. And that's what we had before. So assets pixels per unit 8, reference resolution 3040 by 1440, right? And we're going to get the same size pretty much that we had before in our view. But now we shouldn't have that weird tearing and the problem we had before, because it'll be a little bit better than what we had going on previously, which is what we want, right? We want so that there's no tearing. If there's tearing or jitter or anything like that, that is a problem for when we're using a pixel game. Now, notice that that stuff doesn't appear anymore, and we're seeing much better, much smoother, and less jitter, right? It's not perfect, mind you. There's still issues with our controller. There's issues with our design, right? Again, if I go right in there, that shouldn't be allowed, right? Because remember, we talked about this. There should be at least enough room for my character to fall down and not allow me to get stuck. So let's move this little platform over a little bit, right? Again, moving the platform, not a big issue. We can go into our world and go into the platform layer, right, as an example. And what we want to do is open the tile palette, and let's make sure it's centered on the active tile map, which is the platform. And we want to go into this little arrow and surround the platform we want to move, and then choose the move tool to move the platform around so that there is more space than what we had before. Maybe another block of space, because this block is too small, and we definitely want to move this moving platform so that there's 2 blocks, at least 2 blocks of space between those 2 platforms. All right, so that's one thing we want to do. So let's do that. So I've done the platforms, but I want to make the moving platform also move. So I'm going to check that platform and kind of move it towards the middle, so that there's at least 2 blocks between the 2 platforms. And if I try it now, again, design, we're talking about design, then I shouldn't be able to get stuck anymore. I should always fall down into the death plane. And that's how it should be. Because if I'm making a platform that makes me get stuck, then that's a real issue, right? Because it shouldn't allow me to do that. All right, other things are, we have a lot of things here in the scene, and we're going to get more of them. So a piece of wisdom always is organize, right? That's one thing we should do. So let's start organizing. I have 2 cameras, and what I want to do is select both cameras, right-click, and create an empty parent for those 2. And I'm going to call this empty parent in square brackets cameras. Okay. Same thing with the enemies. These 3 enemies, I want to kind of collect them together, make an empty parent, and call them enemies. There we go. And I'm collecting stuff. The world itself and maybe some blocks. The blocks should be props. So let's kind of collect them together. We'll call them props. You may have more than those, but those 2 props are in there. And then in the world and the props, so this one and this one, these are part of the environment. So let's say create an empty parent. We'll put that in as environment. Okay. If I can spell properly, environment. There we go. And moving platform should also be in there. We can call that, maybe we'll have other moving platforms. So let's make an empty parent, call that moving platforms, or call them active platforms, because we'll have other ones in there, right? Game controller is cool. My player and my spawn point, if we make a checkpoint system, then we want to put that all under the player. So for now, we'll make that. Call that the player. And we have some organization. I like to put the cameras first, typically, the environment second, then the player, then enemies, then game controller. Nice. What do you think? So why am I doing this? Because just like our assets, our hierarchy has to be organized. Otherwise, we're going to continue adding stuff into the hierarchy, and it's going to be very messy. Cool. So that is the first piece. We've organized ourselves. We have a pixel perfect camera. Let's put this up on GitHub. So file, save project, and let's exit from this. So again, going back to Git Kraken, I've got all these changes. One thing I wanted to also talk about is let us look at I want to open up the Explorer for this. So let's open up Explorer. And before we make a commit, I want to do one more commit on this one. So up on Explorer, we can see that there are Lab 8 and Lab 7. Let's kill that solution file for Lab 7 so there's not an extra solution file. So that always bugs me. Cool, let's view changes. These are the ones. Stage all changes for this Lab 8, and we'll say added pixel perfect camera. Okay, commit change to 3 files, and push. And that'll push things up on GitHub. So now we're up to date. Excellent. Going back to Unity. Now that I've got the pixel perfect camera in place, the next piece that I want is on-screen controls, because I think so far we've been talking about RAI and some inputs. And I think one thing we've been avoiding is things like on-screen controls and how that would work. Let's add these on-screen controls in place. And how is this going to happen, right? Well, one thing is we have in external assets, we have a joystick pack that I've shared with you, right? Inside the joystick pack, there is a joystick prefab called dynamic joystick, fixed joystick, floating joystick, and variable joystick. I'm going to add this on the screen. And what I want to do is I want to put it into a canvas. So first, let's add a canvas item. So UI canvas. So canvas is the kind of outside shell. The canvas, we have to be very specific about when we add things to the canvas. One thing is our canvas, right, is going to be something where we want it to be attached to the screen, the camera. So instead of screen space overlay, I'm going to use screen space camera. And I'm going to point the main camera to it. So take the main camera and drag and drop. Plane distance is 100, that's fine. Order and layer is important for our overlay. Let's make our overlay something like 100. So it's always going to be above the screen. So truly screen space from a layer perspective. We also want to use a canvas scaler. Instead of having a constant pixel size, let's change that to scale with the screen. And again, we want to use 3040 by 1440 as our reference resolution. And we want to use 0.5 here as our strategy. Because you'll be able to see it on the screen. It'll be easier for you to plot things when it comes to having one place to look, plus you can see everything all at once. But you don't have to. I'm making it this way because I find that it's easier for me. One thing notice is it says I can check on pixel perfect. And I definitely want to check this on, pixel perfect. Right? We didn't do that in the first class. So once I've got this ready to go and the canvas is on top of my screen, now if I drag and drop my fixed joystick onto my canvas, then I should see it appear on the screen. And I can do it kind of in one place. It doesn't have to be abstract. I think it's just easier to do it this way than anywhere else. And if I look at my game, so too does it appear in my game. Let's look at it as a mobile device. So again, I'm going to go from a layout perspective to a landscape layout. Here's my mobile device, landscape layout. And we can clearly see there's an issue. The issue is that my joystick is outside of the safe area and it's probably a little bit too small. Okay, so first let's move it, or let's multiply it by, make it a little bit bigger. So again, in the canvas, in my fixed joystick, let's make my scales to 1.5. And because we made it a ratio, if I move the, let's move the joystick kind of inside the safe area. But what about if I go to some other kind of phone? Like let's say, for example, an iPhone Pro Max, right? Well, then you can see that this is a problem because the Pro Max has a shorter safe area. The bottom of the safe area is always a place where you can kind of flick up on an iPhone, and you can't do that on an Android phone. So I want to kind of put it so that it conforms to the iPhone's safe area as well, just as a hack, quick hack, right? And then when I go back to another kind of phone, let's check out the iPhone 7. That's okay, still inside. If I check out the iPhone X, still inside. Most popular phones, or common phones I would say right now, XR, still inside. And as well as the XS Max, that's also inside. I probably want to put this a little bit higher though, in these cases. And what about the Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus? Again, you can't just check all of them right now, but at least you have an idea where it's going to be. And if I look at the location here on the screen, it's 401 and 321. Let's make it 400 and 320 with a rect transform alignment with my anchor with the bottom left-hand side of the screen. Okay, that's what that is. Make sense? So that is the screen controls, but there's a problem, right? It's too opaque. And I think what we can do better. We can click in the color. The color for this one, there's two pieces. There's the handle, which is the middle piece, and there's the outside ring, which is the outer piece. So the handle, that's the inner piece, let's change that color so that it's not fully opaque. It's 128. So semi-transparent, right? So we can kind of see things that are behind it if we need to. Same thing with the fixed joystick. Let's change the opacity to 128, which works out to be 50% transparent. First change we made. And now we have our fixed joystick and we have our canvas. Are you with me? Check mark if you're with me, X if you're not. Hey, Kira, thank you. And I got Michael saying, thumbs up. Lucas is a thumbs up. Check mark and a thumbs up for Michael now. And Herman is a check mark. Yay! Awesome. Thanks, guys. Thanks for that feedback. Let's clear that feedback. Thank you for that. All right, so now that we have this in place, we need to be able to use it. So what we want is inside of our player controller. So again, going to scripts, and I'm just going to close off this one just so it doesn't confuse us, and open up the new one. I'm going to go to my player controller here, my player behavior, and what I want is I need a reference to the joystick itself. Okay, so that's number one. Joystick reference. So we have movement, right? And we have animation and stuff like that. And the player behavior, we also want some kind of joystick. We can definitely put it here because what we want to do with the joystick is we want to add it to the movement for horizontal and so on. So we need to make a reference to this, right? And I think that's the first thing that I would want to do, okay? So let's do it. So at the top, I'm going to have a way of getting touch input. So here at the top in my header, I'm going to call this touch input. And what I want in here is a public reference to a joystick. Joystick appears only because I've loaded the joystick pack for you. Otherwise, it would not appear. Okay, so that's the joystick. So here's our public reference. And since we've done this, let's go back to Unity and drag and drop the joystick from the canvas into the player behavior. So again, going back to player, right? And if I go back to my player behavior, so here, click on the player, and at the bottom, let's just hide some of this stuff. At the bottom, where we see that there's a joystick, we just pull, drag and drop from the fixed joystick into there, like so. Awesome. And now when we have a reference to the joystick, we can use it, right? So part 2 for us is after we get the joystick, how can we use it? It's super simple, guys. What I recommend, instead of making our own variable, let's just use the joystick and add to it. Like so, we can say plus our joystick dot horizontal. And that adds another input for the joystick. Now, here's some assumptions we're making. 1, we're not doing touch input and keyboard input at the same time. That doesn't exist. Okay, that's what we're saying. No touch input and keyboard input. Joystick has horizontal and vertical, and the little script that's been created is beautiful because what it allows us to do is get a floating point number that we're going to add or make available to our X variable inside of our move function. Well, if I'm not pressing the buttons, so A or D, then I'm not going to get a value. This is going to be 0, right? And this one will be whatever we put it. So we can actually use one variable to house both input methods. Now, again, not always the way to do it, but in this case, it works. Let's try it. So if I press play, and what we can do is we can move our joystick, and we can see that we have movement. So again, if I move my joystick to the left to the right, then on-screen controls allow me to move. Okay, excellent. But we really don't have a means of jumping. And for this, we need a button. Let's add a button for jumping. So again, I'm going to make a brand new button. Here's our button. Let's move it approximately into place. So it's going to be down here. It should have a reference. So that's the bottom right of the screen as opposed to the bottom left. Here's our button. We'll call this button the jump button. There it is. Now it looks like a button, and we want to make it look like maybe a button from a gamepad. And to do that, let's change the source image from what we have for our jump button from UI sprite to the knob that came with the joystick. Except that the knob is elliptical, and we want to make sure that the knob is spherical or circular, so we can change the height to 160. Remember that the fixed joystick is at 400 and 320. We can put the jump button at -400 and 320. So it's exactly kind of in the same spot as the other one. From a text perspective, the text should be 2 things. 1, we should best fit the text. Okay, that's one thing we should do. And we could definitely use a symbol here. This is just a temporary solution until we make our interface look nicer. But what we can do is we can just put some text in there that says jump. We can also increase the size of it to whatever we want, but it hugs the button too much. So what we can do instead is move into this. And instead of the button being stretched, we can make the button kind of in the middle. That's where the text is going to be. And we can modify the bounds of the text. So we give the button a little bit of padding on both sides. Something that looks like this. And we can give better numbers than these. We can say that position on the, we'll make this 0. And we'll say that the width is going to be, let's say, it's closer to 115, and the height is 110. Heck, let's just use the same numbers. There we go. So 0, 0, 110, 110. And all we've done is taken away the thing so that it looks like it's there. What we also want to do is make sure that the color that we have is pure black. So make sure it's black. And let's make sure also that it is bold, right? So that it is a little bit stronger than what this looks right here. Jump. Cool. Excellent. Just like we did before, the jump button itself, the image for the jump button should have an opacity of 128, right? To give us that same look. Again, I would use a symbol in here instead of the jump button, but we just want to make it work. How do we make this work? Now, we have the button, and we can use the built-in event, but this on-click event, I mean, what about if I stop pressing the button? We should be able to have some kind of ability for us to press the button and stop pressing the button to get input. Let's make a UI controller. Call this UI controller. And the UI controller can be attached to the game object or the game controller. Here it is. This is the game controller itself. So I'm going to drag and drop the UI controller on top of that. There it is, right? And what I want for the UI controller is two things. I want a couple of events, right? Let's scaffold the events first. So again, it's going to be a public void, and we're going to call this on jump button down event. And we're going to have another event that we're going to create called on jump button up, right? We're going to have also a public static Boolean called jump button down, right? So we'll say jump button down. And the jump button down is starting off at false, but when we press the button down, it's going to say, we're going to say jump button down is equal to true. And when we're not pressing it anymore, jump button down is equal to false. So kind of a very simple event system. We don't need the update method whatsoever for now, but we'll leave the start method in place because we'll use it later. Are you with me? Right, cool. Thank you. So now how do I link this up with the jump button? Well, in here, right, as an example, once we go back to here, for the canvas, for the jump button, we normally just have one event, but we can ignore this and we can create another event trigger. The event trigger allows us to add in any events we want. So let's add in a new type of event. There's a bunch of them we can use. One of them is pointer down and pointer up. Let's do the pointer down first. And let's add another one that says pointer up. These events work like a mouse down and mouse up, or a kind of a selection. We're going to select it with our finger. Buttons work for touch as well, automatically. So then what we need to do is add in a couple of areas where we can select the event. We're going to drag and drop the game controller right into both areas. But for the pointer down event, we're going to select UI controller on jump button down. And for the button up event, we're going to say UI controller on button up. If you want to look at the game controller itself, you're going to see that we want to have a UI controller that shows our status. So this is a public static, jump button down. We can't see public and static, unfortunately. It doesn't allow us to do that. But rest assured that it exists. So that's what this does. So when we click it, we have two events triggering. How do we use it? How do we use it? Well, if it's public and static, first of all, let's see if it's not public and static. Let's just take the static part off, just so that you can see it inside the inspector. So take this off and press save and go back. Then when I look at the game controller, you see a little button here, right? Or a little Boolean. If I run it, and if I click the jump button, and if I hold it down, you're going to see that it's on. And I stop clicking it, it turns off. See? So we know it works. The static piece allows us to use it from anywhere, right? So what I mean by that is, back to this, let's make this public static, right? And what we want to say is once this is public and static, then in the player behavior, just like we did before for the joystick horizontal, we can do the same thing for the jump. We can say that we want to add, now it's Boolean, so we have to convert. We can say that, hey, UI controller dot jump button down, that's the event. That's true or false, right? And what we're going to say is if this is true, come on, then return a 1, otherwise return a 0, which is exactly what get access raw jump does. Actually, yeah. And to complete this input, we want to change the Y so that it takes in joystick vertical, just in case we want to climb stairs later on. We don't need this piece anymore for touch input as we've replaced it with our joystick. And the rest should stay the exact same. So all we've done is we've added our joystick horizontal, vertical, and our jump button alongside the other controls we already have. Let's check this out and see how it works like normal. So let's run it. And now if I use the joystick, no problem. If I press the jump key, also no problem. But doing this stuff here is okay. But what if I wanted to check this out and I wanted to play this, you know, kind of in WebGL, or if I wanted to check this on the Windows system, it wouldn't work. In fact, it wouldn't work at all. And so what we want to do is we want to detect our platform. That's what we want to do. We want to say that, you know what, if our platform is an Android device or an iOS device, show me the interface. But if the platform is only WebGL or Windows or, you know, whatever, don't show me the interface. Okay, that's what we want. Does that make sense? So let's do this. How do we detect platform, right, that we want? Well, and where do we want to do it? Well, we definitely don't want to do it in our player controller. We want to kind of disable this canvas, but we want to do it from the UI controller because UI controller kind of is related to the canvas. So we want to make a reference to the on-screen controls themselves, and we want to turn them off and on depending on the platform that we get. Okay. So let's change this again. Let's go back to just a regular layout so we can actually see the on-screen controls. And what I want to do here is in the canvas, I want to select both the fixed joystick and the jump button and add in a parent. But before we do that, just warning, let's just make our jump button a prefab. Warning, if we add in a parent for my fixed joystick and my jump button, it will mess things up. Right now, both controls are not parented to anything. We want to add a parent, but anytime you add a parent, even an empty game object, it's going to inherit a rect transform. Okay, so it'll change our layout a little bit. So let's see what I'm talking about. So right click. If I go to create empty parent, all of a sudden we're going to have potentially issues. Why is that? Because our parent is going to be centered. And so we're going to lose that ability to connect with the right side. So what we want to do with our game object parent, instead of it being centered, we want it to be stretch. That's the first thing we want to do. So our game object parent, which is going to be called on-screen controls, okay, that's going to be stretched. Then our fixed joystick will have a bottom left alignment, and our jump button is going to have a bottom right alignment relative to the parent, which is going to be on-screen controls. On-screen controls now has a relative location, and it's completely hugging the entire screen space that we can see. Cool. So now that we have on-screen controls, we have a way of turning it on and turning it off for all of them. So now let's do that. Go to scripts, and if we go to UI controller, we want a reference to on-screen controls, right? So let's add some additional information. So we make a header here, and the header for this one is going to be button controls. And we also want another thing for on-screen controls. Call it, we'll make a toggle public, and we'll make this a game object on screen controls, and we'll say that we can turn it off and on. We'll do that little check right here. We'll make a new function. So these are event functions. And we'll also make another function. So we'll say private methods. And the private method will be something that checks just, kind of the platform, right? So we'll call it check platform. And we'll call check platform on start. And check platform is going to look like this: switch on application.platform. Okay. And we can say, well, case where it's Android, or case where it's iOS, iPhone player. So runtime platform iPhone, right? In those two cases, we want to do something. And maybe even when I'm in my Windows editor. Well, I'll show you what that does if I don't do this. In all other cases, so if it's here, then I want to say that my on-screen controls.setActive is true, right? Otherwise, for every other case, that's what the default case is, then I want to say that on-screen controls.setActive is false. Okay. That's a little switch case. But if I do it like this, and if I don't include the Windows editor, then when I run it in real time, sure, I lose the editor here, right? So, well, first of all, I don't lose anything because I need a reference. Let's do that reference first. So game controller, I need a reference to on-screen controls. I'm just going to drag and drop for now and press play. And then when I do that, then you're going to see no screen controls. Let's make sure this is the right platform. So landscape. And you can see there's no screen controls. Well, that's fine if I have keyboard access. But what if I don't? If instead I have a mobile layout like this, then I also don't get input at all, right? And I don't want that. So instead, what I want is we also want to add the other one. So case runtime platform dot Windows editor, not the player. Then that also includes those strings. Notice I'm not putting breaks in between because of fall through, right? So switch case, it falls through every case until I hit the break, right? So all of these three cases, like saying if or if else, if that's what I'm doing. Any one of these is going to be set to true. I'm going to use it for those reasons, but not for my default case, which is going to be for WebGL and for Windows, if I want to make a Windows build or some other build, like, for example, PlayStation. And by the way, runtime platform, if I do case runtime platform, you can see that there's a bunch. Xbox Core, Game Core Xbox Series, right? Xbox One, Linux editor, Linux player, Lumen, as well as OS X editor. That would be the Xcode. OS X player, so that would be the simulation, the simulator itself. PS4, PS5, Stadia, the Switch. It supports all those platforms. And the ARM, different kinds of ARM players, they would be all on for those, right? Or off for all those things. As well as Windows Editor, Windows Player, Xbox One, tvOS in general. Okay, so pretty cool. All right, so that's all of them. And that's pretty cool. It's pretty great detection from our perspective. Runtime platform, Android, runtime platform, whatever. Okay, so questions around this. So let's see if it works now. So if I save it and I go back and I want to turn it on or keep it on, then when I press play in the editor, if I want to have control and test it out, then yay, it works, no problem. We can jump, we can do all the things we normally can do. And I also can die nicely, right? And how about if I push this to LD player, right? Or let's try two different layouts. One of them is going to be for LD player and the other one is going to be for, we'll make it for Windows. Let's do Windows first. So I go File and we'll go Build Settings and we'll keep it to Windows. It's already there, set to Windows. So we'll say Build and Run and we'll select a new folder. We'll call this one just Builds, not Builds, just Build, right? For Windows Build. And we'll go in there, select our folder, and it's preset so far, so it'll work. And it'll create a Windows build, might spark out here as you're watching me on YouTube. We'll do a Windows build, and this Windows build will allow me to test to see if I get, those input controls, those on-screen controls, are they hidden as opposed to shown? It's a great way of, different pieces. And it's going to take a second for this to happen. Okay, it says we built it and we're running it. Did it crap out? Oh, there it is. No screen space controls, and I can use my keyboard to control my character just like I want to. You can see the tearing is nice. Doesn't give me any tearing. I have the same controls that I have before. Great. So that's Windows. We can see that that's not there. Let's change to Android now, and we'll switch platform. Today, when it finishes, then okay, cool. Switch platforms. Let's do some things in the player settings I forgot to do. This should be actually lab 8 for Android, right? Same thing with iOS, lab 8. And WebGL, same thing, lab 8. I should say lab 8 for everything, right? And if I go to iOS or Android, and if I scroll down into other settings, make sure that this says lab 8. You can actually click off of it and click back for each of them. So whether it's iOS or Android or whatever, you can make sure that that says the right build. That's important. Otherwise, what's going to happen is, here, look at that, even for Windows, you're going to get weird stuff. Let's also choose our version to be 3. That's the third version we've been working on this little project. And we'll close this. And now we will, now that we're switched to Android, we will build and run Android. Okay, so build and run. First of all, let's detect a device. You should be able to detect your LD player. Like me, I've already got LD player running right here. And I've already done a test for lab 8 before. Let's just kill this one. That was from previous. And let's see how this works now when I run it. So build and run. And I'm going to do a builds folder. And inside the builds folder, we'll call this lab 8B, just in case there's a clash. And when we build it, it'll do the build dance. And this is a great way of testing both on the Windows platform as well as on Android. Okay, it doesn't matter, iOS is the same. The only difference with iOS and Android, like you guys have seen in the past, is that iOS requires Xcode to build it. Whereas here we don't. There's an extra step for iOS devices. So let's see how this goes. All right, it's there. And let's see if it's going to be close. I know it takes a bit of time to do the build. There's no side loading. That's what you're thinking, right? Like a side load for iOS. There's no side loading. Then I know. I've never done that. And you can get your own. It's funny. Do you guys have a developer license? Are you working with a school or are you doing it? Does the school have a university account? It's called a university account. And the university account, what it does is it gives you a license that you can use through the school. Yeah, that's the way to go, right? And what that does, it creates a team, and you can output to your iOS device. And I've done it lots of times, but you need a team. Or you can also have individual licenses, but that's like $99 US a year, which doesn't make any sense if you're just testing things out. Okay, this is building the Gradle project. This is a good thing. We're almost there in terms of where we want to go. Cool. So now that we've run it, let's see what this looks like. On-screen controls, right? We have our jump button. and we have the ability for us to move around. I'll tell you that the controls that I'm seeing here from when I'm working with LD Player, again, but one thing with LD Player is I can use both. I can use the on-screen controls and I can use these things, right? The button. But one thing with it looks like it's a little bit shaky, but the reason why it's a little bit shaky is because it's LD Player, right? So that's the reason why it's doing that. But it works. It does both. So basically, we're able to hide our on-screen controls when we need to, and we can show them when we need to as well. So really great work. That's how it should be. Okay, good. We've done this part. Let's save it, and we'll put it up on GitHub. So file, save project, and let's close down Unity again, and we'll put it up on GitHub. So back to Gitkraken. We'll say a few changes, stage all the changes. And what we'll say is, we'll say that we added on-screen controls. Okay, commit changes, and once we've done that, we'll push them up. All right, and let's open Unity back up for a second. So questions, what are your thoughts around that? Simple controls, but how should you test them? You should definitely test them with a device. That's the way to go. And in order for you to test them with an iOS or Android device, you need to be able to go live on a particular device. Now, I have a Mac, and I can totally test my game out on my iPhone if I want to. That is a great way of testing, because knowing that it goes is one thing, right? Like knowing that you can build it for a particular platform, that's pretty awesome. But actually checking it out, you should check it out on the device, like we've always said, right? So in real life, we're together. I might have had a pile of little devices that I could get you to check with, right? We're not together, so we can only check remotely. So one thing we can do is, if we had a Samsung device that we can check with, then I can kind of check out on that device and put it up. What I'll do is we'll take a short break, we'll come back, and I'll build it specifically for a device and talk to you about how it feels. Does it feel okay or not? If you have an Android phone, when we come back from break, check it on that phone before we move forward. One thing we want to cover before we leave for the day, though, is line of sight, and we'll talk about how that can work and what we're going to do to accomplish this when we come back from break. So now, again, we're sitting at 4:15, and what I want to do is take about a 10-minute break. When we come back around 4:25, I'll have a phone, and we'll be able to check it out. Okay, so let's take a short break, and we'll come back in about 10 minutes.